Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook live broadcast. I'm Steve Altishan, Director of Client Partnerships for Pacific Cascade Legal. And today we have certified divorce realtor Laura Rumford to talk with us about why buying or selling real estate should not be an afterthought in a divorce. Hey, Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Steve. And I appreciate you inviting me to join you today.
Oh, this is going to be great. So before we start in, why don't you just sort of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be to this particular sort of spot.
Well, yeah. So as Steve said, I am a certified divorce real estate expert. And very broadly, what that means is that I'm not only an accomplished realtor and principal broker, I have also sought out a very specific designation called a CDRE, Certified Divorce Real Estate Expert, which sets me apart as somebody that has gone the extra mile, and I'm constantly working on even expanding my knowledge and my skills, specifically in the divorce realm as it pertains to real estate. If you're wondering what my accent is, by the way, I'm from South Africa. Been in the United States since 2006. And you asked me as well what brought me to wanting to study to be a CDRE. Well, personally, very personally, I went through a divorce myself in 2018. So I understand firsthand the process and what's involved. In addition to that, when I lived in South Africa, I was a chartered accountant. In this country, it's called a CPA. So I have an in-depth knowledge of numbers, and I really, really understand how important it is for us to take care of our financial state of affairs, and how important it is for people to make wise financial decisions, especially at this juncture in their lives. It's a really big emotional time, and
Yep.
we need to be mindful of making good choices. Um, so I hope that brings you a little bit of understanding.
Oh, it's perfect. You're perfect for this because you know as much as anybody, that divorce is inherently stressful. I mean, legally, financially, emotionally. And, I imagine that, when you need to decide where you're going to live afterwards, the strain is like just ramped up. So, what can you say to a person who is in a divorce or even contemplating a divorce about, buying and selling their house at this time?
Well, absolutely. It is a very big stress in life, and it's not to be underestimated. That's the first thing that I really want to first of all praise you for taking the time to listen to this webinar, this Facebook Live event, um, and recognizing where you're at right now. It's a particularly stressful time. You're not only dealing with the emotional side, you're also dealing with financial side, and you're dealing with a lot of administrative tasks. And on top of that all, you're dealing with the legal side of the divorce process. It may be the first time, probably is the first time you've ever been in a litigation situation. So that's a huge stressor. And then on top of that, you're not sure where you're going to live, whether you're going to stay in your home or move. You're probably taking care of administrative things like changing your bank account, maybe changing your personal name. And if there are kids involved, likely that's adding a whole new dimension of stress where you're not sure if they don't know yet about the divorce, you don't know how they're going to deal with it emotionally. And you also have uncertainty around how they're going to respond to potentially moving homes. And you might have a lot of emotions tied up in your marital home. Maybe the kids were born when you lived there. You know, and again, that uncertainty. Just as a little point, I looked into stresses, and the Homes Raw stress inventory actually lists divorce as the second biggest stressor in our lives, potentially affecting our physical health. The first stressor is the death of a spouse, and the second to that is divorce. And then, very high on that list and on that scale are also things like a major change in your financial situation and moving home. So, you're putting all of those things together into one bucket and trying to navigate it all at once. And that's enormous.
Oh,
So,
it's crazy. And so, I'm coming into you, let's say, and I've got, again, all these different stressors, including numbers. You talked about being a numbers person, and I'm not a numbers person. And so there's that going on. There's the kids going on. There's, where am I going to live going on? And so maybe can we just start also with some options that might be available for someone in divorce, that, with their new living arrangements, maybe permanent type, maybe temporary type, but if I say, where do I go from here? What can I do? What kind of things can they do? What are some options for living arrangements?
Absolutely. And as you say, the financial side of things is a big component, but also the emotional well-being of kind of trying to visualize what your future may look like. Now, while the financial side is going to impact that, here's some things that I've seen people doing and my perspective on them. Every single situation is different. Every single relationship is unique, and every single divorce is unique. And so only you can really answer how these things resonate with you. But I have seen people continue to cohabit, sometimes for a very short period of time, sometimes for a long period of time. Again, this is going to depend on how you and your soon-to-be ex, how you're able to navigate that, whether or not this works for you. I would think that long-term, this is definitely not going to be a great arrangement, especially if in the future you might not want to think about it, but perhaps there's a new partner that comes along. So this really should be thought of as a very short-term option, and it's often done just because of the financial logistics and trying to just navigate what you're going to do next. The next option I've seen is something that you've probably heard bandied about called nesting. That's when two partners, especially when kids are involved, the kids stay in the home, and instead of the situation where the children pack a bag and navigate each week between those two homes, this is where the children stay in the home and the partners rotate out, possibly each week. It may be to a location such as an apartment that they've rented that each of them rotates into. Sometimes it's to a parent's house or a friend's house. Again, this I see as a very short-term solution, and it's not really a solution. Ultimately, the kids are going to have to navigate this. And as hard as that is, they'll do pretty well. Mine did really well in the long run. But the problems I see with this are, imagine that you are really frustrated with your partner because he or she is particularly messy. They leave their clothes on the floor, they don't wash their dishes, they don't pick up after themselves, and that's really been a frustration for you. Well, now picture that you are rotating potentially into their space each week on top of all the other stuff. So you may be moving into that shared apartment where they've left a horrible mess for you, and then you move back to the home and the kids' bedrooms are a mess, and stuff is left everywhere, and you're constantly picking up after them, even now in post-divorce or during the process of the divorce. So again, whilst a lot of people think this is a wonderful solution for the kids, it can bring a lot of added trauma to the parents' lives. So short-term solution. Then the next one that we often hear is called an equity buyout. And this is where one spouse, I'll call it the in-spouse, decides they want to stay in the marital home and the other spouse agrees to move out. And then there's a shared equity in that home that they've accumulated over the course of their marriage or time that they've owned the house. And so there are various different ways to arrive at net equity. But an equity buyout essentially involves removing the out spouse, the person that's moving out, from title, and also removing them from the mortgage. So that's something that I'll dig into a little more but further on, but it is important that they're not only removed from title, but also removed from the mortgage. And then the other two options are selling the home and potentially renting for a while. A lot of people don't want the permanence of buying a new home right at the outset of their separate life. They want to figure it out. But then a lot of people who've lived in an area that they're familiar with and very happy with, and perhaps they have children that go to school in that area, feel very comfortable buying a new home right away. So those are kind of the options for your living arrangements from my experience. And maybe there's some creative ideas out there that I haven't seen yet, but that's about all I've come across right now.
A lot of options, a lot of great information there. And so you're beginning to consider these options. I'm going to start looking at, okay, how do I evaluate these options? And I'm maybe looking at from again, a sentimental point of view, emotional point of view, a point of view of what's best for my kids' point of view. But you're also looking at it from, like you said, one house, two people, and that's where numbers can come in.
Mhm.
And so what sort of things do you evaluate or help them evaluate when they're looking to make that decision? What are we going to do at the house?
Absolutely. And I'm often speaking to people early on in the process when they're still considering divorce. Sometimes they come to me confidentially for some advice on their options. And I always welcome those opportunities to assist people in trying to decide what their options are. Um, Also, I will get attorney referrals or couples choosing me due to my designation later on during the litigated process when they've already decided what they want to do. But in all those instances, there's a few key things that people need to have a handle on. And one is, do they know what their house is really worth? Uh, all too often, I see people finding a settlement agreement just based on a Zestimate, a Zillow estimate, or a Redfin estimate, or these these computer generated valuation models. Now, they're very smart, these valuation models, but they're not human. And so when you have a human being going in and actually seeing the house and walking through it, they can get a perspective on the actual condition of the home, the actual circumstances in that neighborhood, etc. Does it back to a busy street, etc. And there's three different kind of acronyms or valuation type scenarios that we see typically, and just want to get a bit of light onto those. One, most people have probably heard of, called a CMA, also called a comparative market analysis. Now, these are typically performed by real estate professionals when somebody's considering listing a home, or even if they're representing a buyer in the purchase of a home, they want to see that they believe that there's value for the offer that's being made. So a real estate professional will go and look at the house. They'll take into account all of its significant comparable factors, like how big it is, again, the condition of the home, where it is, the kind of neighborhood, maybe the schools factor in, and the actual location. Is there a park nearby, etc. And they'll look at comparable properties kind of geographically close to that home. And in severe circumstances, they may have to look broadly if it's a very specific or exclusive kind of residence. So they'll arrive at an estimate of what they think the market believes that house will sell for. And typically a CMA is a range of value with an opinion on where perhaps that property should be listed at the outset. Now, a BPO, also called a broker price opinion, is very similar to a CMA, but it's normally used in a different scenario. It's typically prepared for a third party, like a judge or the IRS, or it may be prepared very often where a lender asks for it during a distressed sale, such as a foreclosure or a short sale. And this is typically a more in-depth analysis. It's still not an appraisal, which is the last one I'll visit. But when I perform a broker price opinion for clients, especially those going through divorce, I will prepare that by going and visiting the home, walking through the home, actually recording pictures of the home, because sometimes one spouse has not even been in the home for a number of years. It all depends on the circumstances. And I prepare that in a way that I have a great deal of knowledge about the situation. I speak with both of the spouses about the home, etc. And I provide a neutral opinion on where I believe the market would say the house should be listed, or what the likely selling price is. Appraisals, on the other hand, are where a licensed appraiser will come to the home, and they will not only look at the home, they will also measure it accurately for square footage. They will look clearly at various different aspects of the home. They will go into the attic space and the crawl space. Those are not things I do as a realtor. And an appraiser is usually used to establish value as it pertains to a mortgage, the lending process, when somebody is purchasing a home, because the home is seen as the collateral for the loan that lender is going to be giving out. So an appraiser is the only person actually licensed especially in Oregon, to define value, exact value. A realtor will bring their knowledge of the market and be able to give a very good opinion on likely selling price, but an appraiser is licensed to give value. So
I really love that. And I especially your broker, opinion, because like you said, you talk to people before they even maybe get a divorce, and
mhm,
you can, give a pretty in-depth opinion that they can use when and if they do. But if you get an appraisal a year before the divorce and pay for that, then maybe you're going to have to go ahead and get another one, then. So I like the idea of having some options in anticipation, because a lot of this is about, it's not an afterthought. It's a, get your ducks in a row. So that kind of helps.
mhm.
And that leads to kind of another question that people, I think, aren't completely sure about, although it seems like is it's worth this.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm getting. But there's this thing, equity position. And so can you talk about what that difference is and why, what the house sells for isn't necessarily what you get?
Exactly. So, there may be a lot of costs to establishing that selling price. And those are perhaps the house needs a new coat of paint. Perhaps it is in desperate need of a new roof. And we can navigate all of those. If there's no money to do it, we can find solutions. But there are significant costs. So we need to be aware of what the likely costs are going to be to sell that home, as well as the costs of actually the escrow and sales process. Realtors don't come cheap, they don't come free. And so that's a cost to selling the home. And also there's closing costs and escrow costs and various different things. So not only that, there are liens attached to the property almost in every single case. And those liens could be, most likely there's a mortgage that has to be paid off, and it needs to be paid off at a defined point in time. There may be property taxes that are due. There may be spousal support, judgments, things like that. And there may also be home equity lines of credit. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are liens that perhaps one spouse is not aware of.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I bring is as the knowledge of that, with the knowledge of that as a CDRE, is I have in an escrow process, I have my title company run a preliminary title report very early on in the process. As soon as I get a listing, because I want to be sure that there's no curveballs, there's no last minute nasty surprises where somebody thinks they're going to get 300,000 only to find they're going to get 100,000. I don't want that to happen to my clients. I want them to know. So yeah, that's really answer your question, I hope.
Oh, I love that. And that kind of gets to, well, okay, this whole mortgage thing, and I just want to get out of it. And so I'll just sign something, and then I walk away and I don't have to worry about any of that anymore. Or does that actually what happens?
Well, this gets back to what I referenced a little earlier on. A huge problem I see very often in divorces is sometimes people will come to me a little too late in the process, and they may already have a judgment that says something like spouse X will be removed from title, and spouse A will remain on title and remain on the mortgage, and spouse X will be removed from the mortgage. Well, there's only it's not very easy to remove somebody from the mortgage. Whilst one spouse can sign off on title, yes, the contract between the lender and the parties on that mortgage, it's a private contract. The court cannot dictate to the mortgage company that they should remove somebody from the mortgage. The only way to do that is either through refinancing completely, which is not always as favorable as we'd like it to be right now. The interest rates are higher than they were, and a lot of people are in the low 2% or 3% mortgages. Sometimes people think about assuming the loan. I'd caution you that that is extremely difficult. It very, very, very slim chance. Sometimes somebody can assume the loan. And then there's another instance where people sometimes say, I'm going to move out of the house and I'm just going to stay on the mortgage because I don't care. You can have a title and I'll stay on mortgage, or you can refinance in the next couple of years. And that might sound like a good solution for some people, but the party that's moving out essentially becomes what I reference as divorced from their spouse, but married to the mortgage. They can't really move on because they are still jointly and severally liable for the payments on that mortgage, even if the spouse that's staying in the house is making all the payments. It's still going to reflect against their credit report if the spouse misses a payment, and it's going to hinder them from potentially moving on and buying a new property because that's going to reflect in their debt obligations when a lender comes to qualifying them for a new loan. So
The kind of upshot of that then becomes, well, what do I do? I mean, how do I know if I can afford to even stay in the house? What do I do to figure that out? Or on the flip side, can I afford to buy a new house? I mean, that has to go into something that they need to know because it depends whether they're going to, sell, buy, or stay.
absolutely. And those are financial things that need to be looked at really early on in the process. Please, please talk to me early, and I'll put you in touch with a qualified divorce lending professional, a certified divorce lending professional who can help you navigate some of those questions as regards what you can potentially afford for the future, or can you afford to buy your spouse out? Looking at your present financial position, in almost in most scenarios, one has to anticipate that if you are currently living in a home together, your likely outlook for the future is going to be a smaller home. It makes logical sense because you have two incomes and now you're only going to have one income. I personally went to a house half the size, less than half the size when I went through my divorce. I don't want to discourage you, but I also want you to think about what you can truly afford. And a lending professional can help you navigate that, can help you look at the specific new income flows you may have with possible spousal or child support, factor those in. And there's a seasoning period required for those. That's why I say talk to me early. There's I believe, a 6-month period required where you can show that that income is actually coming into you. So yeah, another big thing to think about is if you are wanting to stay in the home, and very often that's a very emotionally charged decision, and I understand, but do be cognizant of the fact that if you're in a large home, you're moving to a single income. Large home equals large expenses. And do think about carrying all of that on your own. A smaller home is likely to cost you less and possibly set you up for a more successful financial future.
Yeah. So that gets to sort of the nuts and the bolts question. Um, what do what do you say? And I know every situation is different, but because eventually they're going to ask you this question. Should I sell the house?
Absolutely. And I cannot answer that question, but I can certainly give guidance and counsel based on my experience and my knowledge of real estate. But basically, you've got three options on the table. One is you keep the house, maybe you keep the mortgage, and you both stay on both. Don't think that's really viable in the long term. It might be a very short term solution, but I think you need to think beyond that. The second is maybe to buy out your spouse, as we talked about, an equity buyout. And again, talk with me. I'll put you in touch with a divorce lending professional who can help you navigate your options in that regard. And perhaps that's a good solution for you. And the third option is possibly to consider listing and selling the house, and both of you making a completely fresh start, whether you are moving into rentals or temporary accommodation or buying a new home and making a completely fresh start. The most important thing, and I think the title of this event was why the home and real estate shouldn't be an afterthought. And it's really important that even though you've got to navigate super important things like the children and spousal support and all of that, real estate is very likely your singular largest asset that you've accumulated. Maybe retirement will trump it, but very often your singular largest asset. And so it's going to have a very big impact on your financial outlook and your financial future. So again, I can't overemphasize, talk to me early in the process. Get me involved early so I can help guide you through that.
That makes such sense. The need for a realtor who knows how divorces work seems like it is so important, especially if you are ordered to or agree to sell the house and then you both go your separate ways, because the initial question that obviously I think is on people's mind, well, who's going to be our real estate agent? I mean, we can't have the same real estate agent. We're going to get divorced, can we? I think they maybe can.
Well, yeah, I would typically come on board in a few different ways. One is by mutual agreement of the spouses. The other would be maybe an attorney will refer me onto the case, and sometimes I'll be court ordered specifically as an expert on the case to list and sell the home. Um, it's important to understand that whilst my background, apart from being a financial background, my background as a principal broker and an accomplished realtor, um, real estate transactions where a divorce is involved are not the same as traditional real estate. I still practice traditional real estate as well. But these are situations where you have two parties that are potentially in litigation against each other, potentially not even talking to each other. And there's a lot of potential animosity. It's not always the case, but there can be conflict from here to here on the spectrum, and sometimes it can shift during the course of the transaction. So my job and my training have qualified me to really bring neutrality and a lack of bias to the table, no matter what the circumstances are. My job is to sit in the middle as a third party trusted neutral that both parties can communicate with and not even have to talk to each other if they don't want to. And, there's a couple of significant differences between traditional and divorce real estate. Like I said, animosity. Potentially, you've got one spouse that really doesn't want to sell and is uncooperative throughout the process. And I've been court ordered. I have to follow the orders of the court to sell the house. Well, I've got tools in my toolbox to navigate that. Potentially, there's only one spouse on title, but they both have a vested interest in the equity of the home.
Yep.
My job, again, is to navigate that for the benefit, the mutual benefit of both of those parties. And I have answers and solutions for those scenarios. We may also have one spouse who's trying their damnedest to sabotage the sale. They don't want to sell the house. Right. They love the house. Why should they move? And so I've been trained to deal with those scenarios. I've been trained to recognize and understand pitfalls potentially during a divorce sale and get ahead of the ball on those things. I'm also familiar with the divorce process. And so I know how and when to keep the attorneys or the mediators abreast of what is going on without over communicating, because I know, as much as we love our family law attorneys, that they don't come cheap. Their time is not cheap. And if I'm over communicating with them, that's costing you money. So keeping them abreast as they need to know, bringing them in if they need to be brought in, and giving them enough information to move forward with your case, but not involving them in the minutiae of what's going on to keep your costs as low as possible.
Yep. And that's, so important in what, because what happens a lot in divorce cases is that the sale gets delayed over and over and over again. And generally, the problem is that one person doesn't trust the realtor and the other one does. And so it just goes round and round. And so being able to trust one realtor can make that house sell so much faster. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's my job from the outset. If one spouse contacts me, I let them know right away that I am neutral. Yeah. And my first point of contact with the clients typically is a telephonic or a Zoom intake call with those clients to ask them individually and singularly various different questions, so that there's nothing hiding in the murkiness and nothing I'm not aware of. In divorces, sadly, there can be things like restraining orders that I need to be aware of as well. And an untrained realtor might not be aware to even ask those questions. So, if there's a restraining order in place, I need to be certain that I am abiding by the requirements of that restraining order. And most importantly, again, I cannot overemphasize being neutral.
Yep. Oh my God.
Communicating equally.
All those little things, how can one of the spouses come to the house to help show it if they're restrained from coming to the house? I mean, all those kinds of things. Wow.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we are out of time. We blew through 30 minutes.
that was fast.
It was fast. And I really want to thank you for being here today to talk about this subject of buying real estate, not as an afterthought or thinking about it after the divorce has been decided and everything has been decided, but getting in on it early so that you learn more, you know more, and you can make better decisions even during your divorce. I just think that's a tremendous help for people. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Steve. I don't know if you want me to share any of my contact
I
information.
do. Yep.
Um, I can possibly just give you a website as well as my phone number. If you can visit www.pdxdivorcere.com, pdxdivorcerealestate.com, pdxdivorcere.com. And my number, you can call me or text me, 503-927-8770. I hope I'll be a good resource for you. And I hope that I've given you a few answers and not opened up too many new questions. But if they have, then call me and we can talk through that.
I love that. All answers create new questions, but then there's more answers. So I like that. So thank you for being here. And everyone else, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
And if anyone has any questions about today's topic, you can also post it here and we can get you connected with Laura. You can connect with her directly. Either case, you can get a hold of her. So everyone, until next time, stay safe, stay happy.